So, a lot of people are always asking us what's it like to be on the Camino, so we're just going to give you like a little quick one, okay? So, Chris, what's it like to spend one night on the Camino sleeping?
Oh, good. Get some restful sleep today.
So, if we were to say, what are the sights, sounds, smells? What's a good sensory example of the Camino? It smells like feet.
Get out the boat.
Did you shower today, man?
I did not, but I am wearing clean clothes, which is very un-pilgrim-like of me.
Cleaned yesterday?
Yeah, right. So pilgrim mass, right? Pilgrim mass is a very important part of the Camino. You try and make them every day. What would be a good example of a pilgrim mass on the Camino?
Oh, so most people would walk in and they'd be, what do I do?
Yeah, what do I do? Make the sign. How do you guys?
I've been
do this
Catholic
thing?
my whole life, but
Yeah, I'm Catholic my whole life.
I have no idea what to do here.
What do I do? What do we do?
So when you sit down to dinner, right?
Oh man.
Oh, that was my favorite part. Because every time you ask for a glass of wine, they bring you a whole bottle. And when the bottle's empty, they bring you another bottle. You don't even have to ask for it.
It's just there. It's just there every time. It's beautiful. So that's just a little taste. Come here. And now the talk's over, guys. See you later.
Yep. Thanks for coming. Does anyone know the ending to this parable? A ship is safest when it's in port. A ship is safest when it's in port, but that's not what ships are built for. My name is Chris Kelle, and this is Tommy Burke, and we're founders and board members of the Camino Project. But we'll delve more into that later. First, let's focus on the ship analogy. I keep a watercolor painting in my living room, very similar to this, a bit less realistic looking, that I've kept through multiple residences to remind myself of this specific parable. A ship is safest when it's in port, but that's not what ships are built for. The piece of art was painted by a brother at the Abbey of Gethsemane, a Trappist monastery in Kentucky, which also happens to be the destination of my first pilgrimage in 2012. The retreat I made there had such a profound impact on me that I entered a non-Catholic and I left a Catholic. The Trappists, since they live a vowed monastic life, follow the rule of St. Benedict, which requests that all who visit are to be welcomed as Christ himself. The rule states specifically, all guests who present themselves are to be welcomed as Christ. For he himself will say, I was a stranger and you welcomed me. Proper honor must be shown to all, especially those who share our faith, and to pilgrims. Thus, any Trappist monastery you visit, although it may need to be prearranged, will welcome any pilgrim that desires to stay with them. The second pilgrimage I made was to Santiago de Compostela after walking 500 miles on the Camino de Santiago in 2016. For the year leading up to it, I yearned for something more meaningful in my life and wasn't getting that level of fulfillment from my current job. As a matter of fact, it was a detractor. One thing led to another, and I decided to quit my job, put my future plans on hold, and bought a plane ticket to Europe. On top of all the spiritual encounters I had along the 500-mile trek, just making the choice to leave what was known, my job, my life, my family, my relationships, to enter the realm of the unknown and actually following through with it is what changed my life completely. Throughout history, pilgrimage has been mentioned often by many Catholic theologians. In the words of Pope Benedict XVI, to go on pilgrimage really means to step out of ourselves in order to encounter God where he has revealed himself, where his grace has shone with particular splendor and produced rich fruits of conversion and holiness among those who believe. Pilgrimage is even looked highly upon in Japan, where the famous poet Basho depicted pilgrimage as a journey. The moon and sun are eternal travelers. Even the years wander on, a lifetime adrift in a boat, or an old age leading a tired horse into the years. Every day is a journey, and the journey itself is home. That is very much like my experience on the Camino de Santiago. The journey itself is home. Even in pop culture, the rock star Eric Clapton had an opinion on pilgrimage, except for a more pragmatic and less theological viewpoint. He said, "I think everyone's got their own way about looking at their lives as some kind of pilgrimage. Some people see their role as a pilgrim in terms of setting up a fine family, setting up an inheritance. Everyone's got their own definition, but mine, I suppose, is to know myself." These three quotes are perfect examples of the different facets of pilgrimage. Stepping out of your comfort zone to embark on the ultimate journey toward knowing yourself and seeking an encounter with God along the way. So with that, I introduce Tommy Burke.
So, first and foremost, happy feast day of St. James, everybody. Ironically enough, and this just totally happened by circumstance, yeah, right? That we were chosen to speak here on the feast day of St. James, who is the patron saint of pilgrims, and the reason that we walk the Camino, right? So it's not circumstance. We know what it is. It's providence, right? And interestingly enough, also very much like the Camino experience, we were initially supposed to speak at the shrine of Our Lady of Guadalupe, still on this date, which is one of the most trafficked pilgrimage sites here in the world. In fact, it's in Chicago. It's only one of two places globally where you can fulfill your promise to Our Lady, under the devotional of Our Lady of Guadalupe.
Maybe we'll wind up speaking there sometime. I think it'd be a great thing.
I think we
Yeah.
will. Yeah, I would love that. It's so fitting. So those who know me will say, "Hold on, Tommy wrote something and he's going to talk," but this is really the only thing I wrote. So, on the Camino, people always tell you that the Camino starts when you get it home. And here you are, drudge along every day, on the grind. You're like, well, how could the Camino start when I get it home? And then you come home and you realize that you're no longer immersed in this other world and at times this other identity that you have. So you come home and you're like, whoa, light bulb goes off. You're like, they were right. And this was just a little reflection of mine that I had, a year after being on the Camino. As people always ask me, wow, you went on the Camino. Did it change you? Was it transformative? And by default, my answer was always yes. Well, yeah, of course it changed me. I mean, I walked for 3 months on a spiritual pilgrimage. How couldn't it change me, right? And after that year worth of contemplation, I'm not quite so sure that's the correct answer. Looking back, I think it more reminded me of who I really am, of who I've always been. Somehow that long walk on the ancient way, it kind of awoke in the genuine self within, the person I was as a child, right? And throughout our youth, that pure sense of who you really are. It really awoke in my dreams, my goals, ideals, imagination. It had all kind of come back and been reinvigorated by peeling back the layers of, just crap that we go through, right? In everyday life. The hurt, the mistrust, the working a job that doesn't fulfill you, right?
I know what that's like.
Yeah, right? The heartbreaks, and the manipulation or remolding that sometimes it feels like modern society is trying to, push on us. Sometimes making us feel like we need to be somebody that we aren't really, right? And those things were never really what my heart desired, the big house, the fancy car, just the big job title, right? That was never what I desired. And, the Camino really woke that up, so for so many years, these ideals, that society had just felt so alien to me. And for a time, I thought, I'd give it up. Just said, well, this is who you need to be today, right? And it was until I took the plunge and went for a long walk that I remembered really who I really was, So I think it was more of an awakening than necessarily a change or a transformation. That being said, I did see people who were changed and transformed there. I met some people who were just very shy, right? Very had poor social ability. And after 3 days on the Camino, they were like rock stars. They talked to everybody. So that's not to say that that nobody, changes. But for me, it was really a stripping back of that. Now, in my reflection, I remembered something I had written about 2 years ago, and this kind of went with my first leap of faith, going on the Camino. And I wrote, "Some told me to use my head, and be logical. Others told me to follow my heart and to be passionate. But as for me, I think I'll listen to my soul and just be true, right? And I think we can all kind of relate to that one way or another. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it, right? Or at least a small part of it. So anybody in here have an idea what is a pilgrimage? You can raise your hands.
Journey.
I mean, if you have a beer in your hand, don't raise it.
A journey? Yeah, anyone else?
Discovery.
Discovery?
To a famous Catholic shrine or site.
Okay, like a religious destination?
That's the destination.
Yeah?
Like a crash course in humanity. Condensed
Community? That's a good one, actually. I haven't heard that before.
Humanity, yeah.
That's a really good one.
Mhm.
Yeah. Anyone else?
Anyone here ever been on a pilgrimage?
Woo, really? Where?
Yeah.
Monastery of the Holy Cross.
Oh, wait. Downtown Chicago?
On the
Yeah.
south side, yeah.
Anyone
I
else?
did the 500 miles last
You walked the
fall
Camino?
also, yes.
Oh,
Pilgrimage.
wonderful.
Last fall.
Did it? Yeah. Anyone else been on a pilgrimage?
I think I'm visiting Polish people and Indians going from Illinois to Indiana. We have to stop.
To the Shrine of Christ Passion?
It's coming like in September,
Hmm.
in August, in August.
No,
Wow.
Maryville.
Yeah, it's really
In Rome, yeah.
Love to do that.
Brian?
Certain parishes on
Every Holy
Oh, yeah.
Thursday.
Every
Holy Thursday.
Right, I mean, a lot of Catholics are really familiar with
Some
that.
churches, yeah.
It's part of, yeah, it's part of the tradition,
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely.
Anyone else?
Basilica of Our Lady of Guadalupe, and
Yeah.
also last October to the Shrine of Our Lady of Good Help over in Green Bay, Wisconsin.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I love that place. I did the Walk to Mary this year. You know, it's just like a 25-mile walk. It felt like a mini Camino. Do it. It's awesome.
I didn't even
Next
walk
summer.
25 miles on the
It
Camino.
was awesome. You gotta
Usually
do it.
like 12, 14, and I'm good.
Yeah, it was great. If you want to go on the Camino and you're like, I just want a quick little taste of it, do the Walk to Mary next year.
Did they give you wine at the end?
Unfortunately not, but I got myself wine.
I don't think you were a true pilgrim.
Yeah. Oh, believe me, I was. You should have saw me at the end of the night. I was. Okay, so we talked about some really good pilgrimage destinations. I mean, what are some of the main pilgrimage destinations around the world? I'm sure you guys would recognize some of these, right? Lourdes. Anyone here ever been to Lourdes? Okay, a couple hands. Nice. Beautiful place. I love Lourdes. Rome.
I stopped at Lourdes before I walked the Camino, actually, and I went 500 miles without a single blister on my foot. So
Lourdes, I think, had a mini healing experience.
I think
I made a
there's
detour there, and it
there's
was
some
great.
certainly some miraculous activity over there.
So, anybody ever been to Rome? Oh, got a lot of hands there. Fatima? How about Mecca? Anybody in Mecca? Just want to make sure. So, and we have one Camino vet in here?
Two?
Anyone else? Three? Three? Nice. Hey.
Wow.
And I got a certificate too.
Where did you start?
In Santander, northern Spain.
Oh, you have the northern route.
The Del Norte.
Wow, that's
Nice.
impressive.
Well, I biked it. So.
Oh,
Okay.
No, that's it.
Who else?
still kind of cool. Yeah.
Where did you start?
Shenzhen.
Okay.
Saint Jean?
Anyone else?
Saint Jean.
Saint Jean. I started from Saint Jean.
Saint Jean Pied de Pau.
Saint Jean.
Saint Jean Pied de Pau.
Yeah. I don't speak French.
Okay, so we've got some veteran pilgrims in here. So now, I mean, the real question is, what is a pilgrim? We have the Camino de Santiago here. We actually changed some more slides up. So anybody who is unfamiliar with the Camino de Santiago, this is the main route, which is called the French Way. And as Chris will get into later in the presentation, there's some other names, the Milky Way. He'll explain why that is. I happen to start right here in a town called Le Puy-en-Velay. It's really cool to say it, Le Puy-en-Velay. It's a long walk. I mean, it's a long and beautiful and very rough path. I did make a detour to Lourdes. I was injured and did have, I won't call it a miracle, but I don't know. I went and walked in there very injured, thinking I would be done with my Camino, and walked out and crossed the Pyrenees, a week later, so some miraculous stuff there. So now we go, Gabby? So what is a pilgrim?
He's a pilgrim. So what's the difference between a pilgrim and a tourist?
Anyone?
Brian.
Suffering.
That's a pretty good description. Yeah. Suffering. There are other things too, Lenny. Anything aside from suffering?
Sacrifice.
Sacrifice. think sacrifice may be better than suffering.
I'm surprised nobody here has said wine as much as you've been talking about wine. What's a pilgrim? Wine. Done.
Tourists get that too.
Yeah, tourists get that too. But they pay a lot more for it,
But
trust
the
me.
wine is the reward for the suffering.
Yes, it is.
So
Yes, it is.
that's the difference. Nicole?
Looking for entertainment versus a spiritual experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Anyone else? Yeah, I mean, some pretty good points there. I mean, a pilgrim really is on a pilgrimage because of, faith and sacrifice and mortification and spiritual strength. But first, I'd like to get into the history, actually, of religious tourism. It's actually a very recent thing, right? It's all happened in the last 40 years. I met somebody recently at a Camino pilgrimage. Like, I'm really into this stuff, right? At a Camino convention. Who?
He goes to Star Trek conventions too, by the way.
I'm just a huge geek, right? And this guy actually did research about word usage throughout the ages regarding different terms. So if you look at religious tourism, it's something that only exists like in our lifetime or our parents' lifetime. It didn't really exist before that. And a lot of the resurgence or the uptick of religious tourism has to do with the ease of international travel and technology that you didn't back in the Middle Ages. Back then, you pretty much had to walk everywhere or go on horseback. So every destination was a major journey. So that's something that you're seeing now that you didn't previously. So, but if you look at the word pilgrimage in English over time, you had a peak actually about 200 years ago in the mid-1800s, which had a steadily decline over the last 100 years, mainly during World War I and World War II. But as you can see, in the last 20 years, it's actually coming up significantly, and we're going to go over a couple of reasons why it's regaining in popularity, especially the Camino de Santiago. But more specifically, World War I and World War II, it's very hard to go on a pilgrimage, when most people who were going on pilgrimages were European, and if you have Germans knocking on your door, it's going to be hard to leave home to go to walk to a holy site.
Any Germans in here, please go find Chris later this evening and knock on his door. Scare him a little bit.
At their own risk.
Right.
Now, if you look at the next slide, actually, which looks at, instead of English, in Spanish, you have the word peregrino. This is where it gets a little bit more interesting, because the Camino de Santiago was a very Spanish pilgrimage, and you had two major peaks over the last 100 years. Both were following major religious apparitions. Yeah, the apparition at Lourdes and the apparition at Fatima, where you had literally the most pilgrims on the Camino de Santiago during that time. You had a slight decline during the rediscovery of the relics, but in the 1950s and 1960s, surprising uptick during the Franco era, because although Franco was a nationalist dictator, he also focused on the Spanish culture, and he promoted the Camino and Catholicism during that time. So you had a huge uptick in pilgrimage on the Camino de Santiago during the Franco era, which is only starting to come back to those levels right now. So what's the pilgrim archetype? So
What do we, when we look at, Catholic theology and Catholic terminology, what makes a pilgrim, right? We had some really good examples, in terms of suffering, right? Sacrifice. It's obviously more than just being a tourist. Tourist is pretty easy. You go, you check into your hotel, you hop on a bus, you go see, the Holy Land or whatever, which is great, don't get me wrong, and then you go back to your hotel. I mean, if you wanted, you could be in a bubble. Chances are you'll meet some really cool people on your bus or whatever, but it's a completely different experience. The true pilgrim, is going to be composed first and foremost of faith
What's
Right.
important about faith with in regards to a pilgrim as opposed to a tourist is this is kind of like leading up to a pilgrimage. You're, as I mentioned earlier in my introduction, you're actually taking a serious physical risk, but you have no idea what you're going to get in return. You know, you're leaving I left my job, I left, my family, and I clearly risked a lot of things, but you don't get like a gold star at the end, you don't get a reward, you just get a piece of paper.
There's some cool pieces of paper.
You get some cool pieces of paper that say, yeah, I did this, but like, what was the real reward there? That's where faith comes into play. And that's a major facet of pilgrimage as opposed to tourism, because you have that faith to go on the journey not knowing what you're going to get and looking for God's grace along the way. Spiritual poverty is something else you find on pilgrimage that you don't in tourism. The way I encountered spiritual poverty on the Camino had to do mostly with detachment from worldly possessions. So when you leave home to walk the Camino, you don't have your house, like in your car, and like all of your stuff. Literally, all you have is the stuff that's carried in there. So, and the more you carry on there, the worse your knees are going to hurt, and the more blisters you're going to get on your feet.
The first mobile home.
The first mobile home, yeah. And you actually have to reduce your attachment to worldly possessions just to prepare to walk the pilgrimage. So there's a major transformative experience that goes along with leaving all those possessions behind and just taking what's on your back. A couple changes of clothes, some soap, a notebook, and a shell. That's about it. That's all you have. So it's really easy to disconnect from the world while you're out there. Third, mortification. That's physical pain. That's, Brian mentioned, suffering. It's a major physical risk when you're climbing mountains. I mean, you're not just going for a walk in the park. I mean, it's dangerous. You could slip. You could hurt your ankle. Actually, met one woman along the way that about a week into it, she slipped on a rock. And she says, I'm fine. I can finish it. She wanted to see a doctor. It turned out her ankle was broken. And she walked the entire 500 miles on a broken ankle, all because of faith that she had along the way, to get to her destination. But you clearly saw physical and emotional pain along the way, and that makes us stronger.
Yeah,
Physical and emotional pain.
And
Yeah. Mostly emotional pain.
Spiritual mortification.
Where did you see emotional pain? I mean, like people were trying to recover from, divorce and
divorce, loss. I mean,
Mhm.
you meet. It's really interesting. When you walk down the street here, nobody. First off, you don't say hello to anybody. Nobody says hi anymore. But on the Camino, my fellow pilgrims will know it's buen camino, buen camino. I was honestly worried when I came back from the Camino that I was going to walk down the street and be like, hola, buen camino, hola, buen camino.
He was crazy guy.
Yeah, like
What do you-
back in the
what-
city, man.
what language
I'm
are you
gonna rob. Like so. But there, it's that simple hello, right? And then all of a sudden, start talking. Hey, where are you from? Where you been? Why are you here? How'd you hear about it? And next thing you know, people are like, I lost somebody. I met a woman. My husband was unfaithful, and I have children, and I don't believe in divorce. I don't know what to do. And this is just such an immediate, intimate thing. And you see that it is so much more than the physical mortification, right? Because we can all just get past that, plug it up, keep on trucking, right? But it's that emotional sense. You're being from home, you're out of your bubble. It's that spiritual sense. You're away out of your comfort zone. Is the the little devil sitting on your shoulders, he's going to be as loud as an angel on the other side. And that's oftentimes easier said than done, right? But there's where we get
Sometimes faith takes practice.
But how do we get past that?
Spiritual strength.
Spiritual strength.
I mean, you pray, and that's what helps you get to the destination. But I actually wanted to bring up something that you mentioned under mortification, actually. Why are you here, right? Like you see that everywhere. Everyone that you encounter, see, the first thing they say is buen camino, the second thing is why are you here? But how often in your day-to-day life do you actually have that introspection, right? Like, have you ever really sat down to think, why am I here? Like, no matter where you're at, like, why am I why am I here, like in this relationship? Why am I here in this job, like in my life decisions?
Why are you here right now? Not because of us, because of the free food and beer.
Well,
As long as you know.
I'm not going to complain. But the Camino kind of, forces you into that point of introspection, just in your day-to-day encounters.
Which leads us to really the foundation of the whole nine, and somebody
You hit that right on the head.
Right on the head, whoever said that. The sacrifice.
Because neither of us would have been there on the Camino if we didn't sacrifice something. You just don't pack your bags and walk 500 miles or 1,000 miles on a whim, right? You're sacrificing something to get out there. And Tommy and my experience is that sacrifice is really the true aspect of a pilgrim, because you're leaving something behind. You're sacrificing something in order to gain spiritually.
It's the true foundation of being a pilgrim, but, I really looked at oftentimes the pilgrimage as the Camino itself as a little snapshot of life, right? And if we were to boil down to say what makes you a pilgrim, and that's going to be sacrifice, I think we'd be very correct to say, well, what makes you a good husband or a good wife? Sacrifice, right? What makes you a good friend? Sacrifice. What makes you a good Catholic? Sacrifice. So, in many ways, we see these elements that we're talking about them in terms of the Camino, but just like in life, we have our ups and downs, the days where you don't want to get out of bed, the days where you feel spiritually strong, the days you feel spiritually weak. You go through all of that on your walk, whether it's 2 weeks, whether it's 3 months, you will go through that on your walk. And if you can't break, certain cycles that we have, if you can't make that first step for the Camino, it's the faith that gets you on the plane. It's the faith that gets you out of your first pilgrim's mass and out of the cathedral, right? And it's your spiritual poverty, that truly strengthens you, because instantly you say, wait, hold on a second. I've got 2 boxers and a backpack, 2 pairs of boxers and a backpack, 2 pairs of socks. But what do I have really? Well, I have this freedom to have a connection with God that I've never had before. I have the ability to say buen camino to somebody, and they tell me about their life, and I tell them about mine. And I can forever call them a friend, whether or not I ever saw them again. Maybe even more than a friend, a brother and sister, right?
You start to respect the fleeting moments. Like, even if you only had 15 minutes to encounter somebody, on the Camino, you just have some connection, like, for sharing a common goal. And even though you might not see them ever again, having that physical, spiritual connection that you had during those 15 minutes could be life-changing.
And we have that because of our poverty, right? Our spiritual poverty, we're without our pride, we're without our prejudice, we're without our walls, our boundaries, especially these things, right? We're without them, which is probably the biggest wall that we put in our lives these days. And through this
I didn't see everybody without those. There was one guy in my pilgrimage that was finding Pokemon at the different, old Spanish shops.
What makes you not a real pilgrim? Pokemon. You're disqualified. We revoke everything that you got.
Well, challenge that a little bit. You speak of archetypes, but just what you say, different people have different reasons for going there.
Yep.
Yeah, maybe he wasn't sacrificing as much as you folks, but there was something somewhere, if he was truly a pilgrim, that he sacrificed on his way there.
Well, it was mainly,
You speak of the 500-mile version.
Of course.
If you want to get technical, you got to walk at least 100 kilometers.
100 kilometers, of course.
But if you want to talk about the actual transformation, though, I didn't see him at the end of the Camino. Maybe the first month or the first 2 or 3 weeks, he was finding Pokemon at the different towns. And at the end, he realized that there's more to life than that. So, I'm not going to judge him for doing that, because he could have certainly found unity with God along the way, or transformation. But it's still funny.
At the end of the day, what you're really looking to do is you're looking to immerse yourself and leave yourself in your comfort zone.
You're right.
I had my technology there, and that didn't make me better or worse than anybody. That's not the important point, right? The important point isn't necessarily that he spent all his time, finding Pokemon. or not praying every day. The important point is while you're finding Pokemon, you don't know what lifelong, friendship that you may have come across. You don't know what beautiful cross off in the distance you miss, or beautiful view, right? So there is a mortification element here. And, I've heard a lot, especially in a lot of pilgrim communities, that, well, everyone's, Camino is just their Camino. And, if you're more saying as a tourist, if you hop on a bus, go from town to town, are you a pilgrim or are you a tourist, right? So, there is a nature here and some very important underlying pillars that aren't necessarily qualifiers, but they're certainly ingredients, right? To the greater archetype.
Sure, there's other things aside from this, but
right.
These are some of the things that we saw were really the major
And
differential.
through your mortification, okay, through all this pain that you go through these sacrifices that you make, you build up your spiritual strength, and this is what really keeps you going. There are times on that way where you feel like you just can't go anymore. Maybe you ran out of water, whatever it is. Happened to me, 6 hours on the Roman road. Anybody, does that ring a bell? The Via Trajana? No? Because you guys were very smart. You didn't take it. That's why. A path that diverges. It's an alternate route. And maybe did you take it on the bike?
I was on the northern way. We took a lot of detours.
Oh, you're on the
just
northern
by
one.
necessity,
Right.
because we
You
didn't-
took the road as opposed to the...
No, there
There-
were even like certain shells in the northern way said bikes this way.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah, you see
So
that.
we didn't run over
Well,
it.
there's
So
some
you
places
get
that are
an
dangerous,
alternate,
like...
you get an
Yeah.
alternate path, right?
Yeah.
And it's called the Via Trajana, and I'm like, okay, this is the longest stretch of Roman road left in Spain, so I'll take that. And I didn't really think too much of it, like a fool, didn't really check my guidebook. And I had a 65-year-old retired school teacher and a 65-year-old Portuguese guy walking with me. I start walking on the way, come to realize we're in the middle of the Meseta, 98 degrees, no shade, no water, no town, nothing, for about 6 hours. Run out of water. I would wait for the older guys to come catch up with me and then walk on. And then they stopped catching up with me. And then I got to the point where, I have no water. I don't know where they're at. I can't see them. Do I press on or do I go back for them? And mind you, there are little crosses for people that died on this stretch. Okay? So I had to make this decision.
Maybe you're going the wrong way.
What am I going to do? And that's where my spiritual strength really carried me. And my faith that I would get to where I needed to go to make sure we were all okay. And spiritual poverty, I didn't even have water. And mortification, every bit of it was mortification and sacrifice. And you know what happened? I finally got to the town, found somebody to get on a car, drive back to get these older guys and bring them back. And oddly enough, that guy ended up reserving a hotel room in Leon for me. Said, I'm taking you out, you get 2 nights in a hotel, and I'm literally buying you dinner and drinks every night. And weirdly, that's in the movie The Way. If you've seen it, it's the same place.
Has anyone seen
where
The
they
Way?
stay in a hotel.
Yeah.
So, this is really, everything kind of feeds you and you become something that you're not here.
So can a true pilgrim stay at a 4-star hotel?
Mine was probably 3,
Okay, so a 3-star hotel is okay.
For those 2 nights, it was more than okay. Let me put it that way.
So about spiritual strength, right? I'd like to talk about the most spiritual experience that I had on the Camino. So for people who've walked the Camino before, kind of understand you kind of have your Camino family. And you get people that you walk with and you join with for a few days or a week, maybe the whole thing. For me, it was a group of people, the first people that I met that were around my age, which was fascinating. I saw a bunch of people like under 21, and everyone else was over 60. And there was like nobody between like 22 and like 40.
Especially Americans.
Especially Americans.
You see some
Spanish people,
Europeans.
yeah, sure, Europeans, because usually get a month of vacation there. But I thought about that. It's interesting because you kind of have the most to risk in this age group because you don't have time. You don't have time, and you have a job. So you have to risk your career and take a major amount of time off to do that. If you're under 21, you generally have a lot of time, but you don't have money. So you see some people, that are there because of their parents, and They're doing summer vacation for school.
Where were
Yeah.
these people from that you saw that were that age?
They were from Wisconsin and
That's right.
Minnesota. Yeah. So anyway, so I joined with these people, and it was so great to finally connect with somebody that had a similar experience as me, because my friend Monica actually quit her job because she wasn't happy with the way that it was going, and bought a plane ticket to Europe to walk the Camino. For her, it was the second time, and also she spoke Spanish, so it was really great to walk with her because she got special deals everywhere because she could talk with them. And I was just bumbling around, in English, trying to
White Camino, White Camino,
yeah,
White Camino.
that was it. That was pretty much the extent of my Spanish. But I learned the hard way. At least I learned how to say aseos, donde están los aseos, where the bathrooms.
Yeah.
Or una cerveza, por favor. So I learned the important things. So we get to a town called Valorado, and I needed a rest because I was just exhausted. And it was time for us to split off because they were going to keep walking because they had a destination that they needed to reach by the end of the day. So we split off, and I said goodbye to them and went on my own. So the first thing I did when I went on my own, while I continued walking, is I went to the Pilgrim's Mass. So it was beautiful because they were singing different songs about the Camino, different Catholic hymns. And each verse they do in a different language, so that they would be inclusive to everybody there. So you go in and they sing in Spanish, and English, French, German. And I thought that was just amazing. And then afterward, the priest pulls me aside and he says, "Oh, you're a good singer. Do you sing professionally?" And he's telling me this in Spanish. And I'm trying to make out what he's saying because I didn't speak a word of Spanish. He didn't speak a word of English. But we ended up communicating for a half hour, almost an hour even, just using hand signals and body language, just because you had that spiritual moment. And after that, he grabbed me by the arm and he said, "I gotta show you something." And he takes me outside, and to the top of the hill. And I was like, "I just walked 20 miles today. You want me to climb a hill in town?" So I said, "I believe you. You're a priest. You probably know what you're doing." So he takes me up to the top, and it's the highest point for hundreds of miles. And all I did, it was completely silent too. So all I saw was the road, where the road was going in front of me, the road leading up to me, behind me, and just a complete closeness with God. And it's just so amazing knowing where I was going.
And where you been?
And where I had been. And it wasn't just seeing it physically, but I felt it in my soul, knowing where I had been, where I had come from, and where I'm going spiritually. So, now that leads me into our hero story. So both Tommy and I got to be heroes on the Camino, kind of unexpectedly too. So, I already got to the end of the Camino, to Santiago de Compostela, and I decided to walk more because 500 miles wasn't quite enough. You get addicted to it.
Yeah.
So I decided to walk to the end of the world. There's a town called Finisterre, which literally means the end of the world. And you believe it when you get there because there's a cliff and it drops off into the Atlantic. So the city is appropriately named. So I leave Santiago, the town of Santiago, and the road splits off, just like Tommy had encountered. I knew that was bad news because it's very easy to get lost. So I found some pilgrims who were going the wrong direction. So I ran after them and I said, hey guys, you're going the wrong way. The Camino's over here. And they came up to me and we took a look and they were actually going the wrong direction. So I ended up joining with them a bit, and there was a German girl in her 20s and an Australian guy who looked about 20 years older than her. So we walked the whole rest of the day, and I said, wow, I really wanted to be alone, but I don't mind joining with another group. I guess it's okay. So we get in, we have dinner, we have a great time, Camino camaraderie. And we wake up in the morning, and the girl wakes me up and says, oh, we're leaving now, why don't you come with us? And I said, it's 6 o'clock, and I've already made it to Santiago, I don't want to walk anymore. And she's like, no, come on, join us. And I said, all right, I'll join you. So we get out, we walk, and it's just the two of us. And she whispers over to me, she says, "Thank you so much for joining me, because that Australian guy was like touching me inappropriately, and you rescued me. And I'm so happy that like you joined me today." And I didn't even think anything of it. I just thought, yeah, she wanted something from me, so I'll come walk with her. And when we walked into town, 6 of her German friends were there in town, and she brings me in by the arm and she says, "Oh, hey everybody, meet Chris, he's the hero." So it's like, that was really cool, you know, to feel like a real hero on the Camino, just being myself, right? And I think you got to be the hero too, Tommy, didn't you?
Yeah, I mean, interesting point about that real quick is, like we were talking about before, how these things don't happen unless you say hello to somebody, right? You know, you got to save this woman from a creep. And mind you, there are not a lot of creeps on the Camino. I actually never came across that my entire time there. But had Chris not been personable and been pilgrim-like and probably said, what, buen camino, right? That would have never happened. You know, I had, my story I said before about the Roman road. If you go on the Camino, just never walk that road, please. Never do it, okay? 2 quick ones. One of them, there's a really famous mountain, Alto de, with the pilgrim statues on top,
Yeah.
right? The
Alto-
cutouts.
Alto
yeah.
Perdón.
Alto de Perdón.
The hill of
Forgiveness, right? So I'm walking up there with a group of some pilgrims, some Americans, some Koreans, like a really mixed group, and it starts raining on us. We're like, okay, we'll stop. Got to the top of the mountain, we'll stop and grab a quick lunch. Next thing we know, thunder, lightning, the whole nine. 2 of the pilgrims, the Americans, one of them was another 65-year-old school teacher, which is, I kept getting around these school teachers, these 65-year-old school teachers, right? Which is so weird because when I was in school, the teachers couldn't get away from me quick enough. Tommy, oh no, get away. And she's there with her son, who's like 30 or whatever. And she says, well, I'm pressing forward. I'm going to continue going up the mountain in the storm. I've walked the Sierra Nevada many times. Ooh, ooh. And I'm like, well, I wouldn't do it, but okay. And the son stays with us. 15, 20 minutes later, about 10 minutes after she left, the thunder and lightning gets worse, and the rain turns to hail. And I'm not talking like, here we get hail, it's like this, sometimes a little bigger, but it never lasts for more than like a minute or 2, right? This was like golf ball size hail. I never saw anything like it in my life. That didn't stop. And I go to him like, man, your ma's out there in this, let's go get her. So we run out, and to give you a perfect reenactment of what this experience was like, I would say it was like this. Ooh, 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 I mean, you're just getting pelted, and it's hitting you everywhere you don't want it to hit. And finally we find her, she's hiding under a tree. I grab her bag, throw it in my backpack, and said, let's go. There's a video of the rescue effort. Somewhere, I don't have it yet, I've been trying to get it. And she said, oh, you were my hero.
If it's not on Facebook Live, it didn't happen.
It never happened, right? But, she never did send me the video, so maybe she didn't really think I was a hero. Second cool one was, I'm walking in a really rough path, like Palas del Rey, somewhere outside of Sarria.
Okay. So in the last 100 kilometers.
Puerto Marin, it was called. Mm-hmm. And the path was really rough, and I look and I see this older
Puerto
lady.
Marin has St. James joke, right? Practical joke. You walk in, and actually the Camino goes off to the side, but then there's 200 steps that lead up into town.
Oh yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And you get there, and everyone's like, all right, I'm here. And you get up the top there, and they're like, oh, it's that way. Back down. I'm like, what did I do?
Yeah, they get you there. But I'm walking up, and the path is very rough, and I see this older woman on the side of the road. And when Camino, she responds with an American accent. So I said, hey, you're from America. Yeah, I'm from Chicago. I said, man, you're from Chicago, me too. Cubs or Sox? This will determine where we go from.
Which list are you on?
Where are you? And she said, well, I'm from Chicago, but I live in Rome, and my, nun radar goes up. I'm like, Chicago, Rome, older lady, are you a nun? She's like, yes, I'm a nun. And she says, I've had all these surgeries, knees, hips, the whole nine, I can't go on any further. I said, no, it's okay. Let's go, grabbed her backpack, took her by the arm, walked her for, the next hour and a half, 2 hours, got her there. You're my hero, I'm buying you dinner. I still talk to her to this day. Sister Brenda. You know, had she said she wore a Sox fan, she'd still be there. But you get these just by simply saying hello. You get these experiences to really save people now. And this is, see these bottles when they go down? One magically appears. That's the beautiful part of it. So, break time. How do we feel?
Yeah.
We feel good, right? We feel good? Do we feel Altrea? Altrea, let's say Altrea Suseya. The ancient pilgrim call, Altrea. Onward. Altrea.
Onward?
Upward.
And upward.
Right? We feel it, right? So, alright, here we go. So, I mean, how could we really come here and talk about the Camino, talk about pilgrimage, from a Catholic perspective, without talking about, the theology or the biblical elements behind the Camino and behind pilgrimage? You guys could run us out of here if we didn't do it. It'd be like a fraud. So we really see the first biblical take on pilgrimage or story in Exodus. Exodus being one of the most widely known or well-known stories in the Bible, right? One of the most, famous books. If you didn't know it from reading the Bible, I would hope you have seen the Ten Commandments. If you haven't seen the Ten Commandments, the exit's right over here. So we don't got to get really too deep into the story, right? What do we know?
There's a movie called Exodus.
And there is a movie called Exodus. A newer movie, yeah. But we don't got to get too deep into it. What do we know? We know that the Israelites were enslaved, right? They were in bondage in Egypt, in servitude to the pagan Pharaoh, right? They had abandoned their ways that had been introduced to them by their father Abraham. They had abandoned their identity really as a people and had become comfortable in this servitude. And then all of a sudden this madman comes up, Moses, and he says, hold on, this isn't who you really are. You're not doing what you were meant for. Okay? Now let's take a pause here. The Israelites, I think we can relate to them, and this may be why it's such a well-known story. Has anybody in here ever been in a job where they felt more like a slave than, somebody who's doing something with their heart and passion? Anyone? Has anyone in here, ever felt completely, I'll raise two there. Has anyone in here ever felt, completely unfulfilled, or felt at times that they had abandoned who they are? They maybe had, you've given into your vices a little too much, right? You've abandoned these values, or gotten comfortable maybe, in this place where we know we're not supposed to be. And this is what happened with the Israelites. They got comfortable in their slavery. And I think that happens to all of us at times, right? We get a little comfortable in where we are, because why? Because change is hard. Even if we know it's good change, it's that bad relationship where it's really, really bad for you, but it's harder for you just to make that big step, that change, and leave it all behind. Well, here are the Israelites, but you know what they did? Is they followed this madman who said, hey, we're going out of here. You're the chosen people. You were made to be in the land of milk and honey, where our Father wants us. So follow me. And they went and set forth on what was a 40-year pilgrimage. Right? I mean, it was for 3 months. It's laughable.
I thought 500 miles was a long way.
I mean, I thought 6 hours in the desert was rough. You know what I mean? But so they set forth. Think about those things we talked about before, right? Faith, poverty, spiritual poverty, mortification, right? Spiritual strength, sacrifice. It took all these things. And just like we do in life, and remember I said the Camino is kind of a microcosm of the pilgrimage of life, where they slipped and fell. We all do that. Hey, I'm feeling really good, I'm feeling great, feeling close to the Lord. Ah, crap, I slipped and fell. Back into confession, right? We know they built the golden calf. God said, no, I'm going to give you some rules, but come on, let's go. And then what happened? They were fed, right? What were they fed with? Anyone? Manna, right? They were fed with manna while in the desert. God literally gifted them with food from heaven, which filled their bellies and helped them, make their way. And then Moses, Moses says, hey, hold on. I'm only going to go this far. My journey's done. You're going to go on. I will never see the land of milk and honey. You will go. Right? So they press on without him. Now, what does this kind of remind us of, right? This kind of reminds you of, the story of Christ. Where Christ says, I've taught you the new way, right? But I can only go this far. You'll go on without me. And you'll reach the promised land. Of course, Christ is in our promised land, right? So we see this correlation here. And this is really the very first pilgrimage. This is the Jewish pilgrimage, which is to really a physical place, okay? The physical, what would be known as Jerusalem, right? And the Jews, they have some musical talent, right? You may have heard of like Billy Joel or, Paul Simon, right? They tend to have some musical talent. And they recorded these on what's next.
So when I introduced myself, I talked about my first pilgrimage. It was to the Abbey of Gethsemane. And the one thing that really struck me, that really hit me about that place, is that the monks there pray unceasingly. They literally pray 7 times a day plus Mass. And does anyone know what monks pray, what prayer they use every day? Psalter, but
Liturgy of
the Hours. In the Liturgy of the Hours, they actually read through all the Psalms in a 2-week period. But there's 2 minor hours called the mid-morning prayer and the mid-afternoon prayer, which rotate every 2 days and every 1 day. So I thought about it, I said, there must be something important about these specific Psalms compared to the other ones, because they're praying them like way more often than everything else. So actually, I called Relevant Radio, Go Ask Your Father, and I said, why do they say these psalms every day? And everything, all the other ones they say every 2 weeks. And the father didn't know. I stumped him. So I got to stump the guy on Relevant Radio.
Yeah, we better talk to them.
Yeah, you got to talk to them. Monsignor Stewart Sweathead. So I emailed him and I said, hey, you didn't answer my question. I'm like, what gives? So the next day I listened in and he said, well, there was this young, recently converted Catholic that wanted to know about the Liturgy of the Hours. And he said, they're called the Psalms of Ascent. And all of them have to do with pilgrimage. So I found that to be really interesting. So I read through the subtitles of all of them, and they actually outline a physical pilgrimage. A couple of them are stretching it, but it really flows just like the Camino did for us. I mean, it starts with a cry for help. I mean, that's the calling for the Camino, right? I need something more. Thanksgiving for help in crisis. Unshakable faith. I mean, that's the faith that we have to stay strong in the face of adversity. The Song of Returned Exiles. Success depends on God's blessing. I mean, God blessed us, so many times along the Camino. Just
Every
making
day.
a decision getting there, and then every day with the encounters of other people along the way. The blessings of home, we couldn't have done it without our family, our friends.
See, I don't think my family's prayers were answered because I'm pretty sure they prayed for me to stay there. So it didn't work for me, or for them.
Yeah. Or at least the blessings from REI. The fate of Israel's enemies, the prayer of repentance and trust, the song of serenity, God's promise, and the blessings of unity. I mean, we go through this transformative process. If you're looking at the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius, the end goal is to have unity with God. And walking this way through the unknown with spiritual strength, I think you find that every once in a while when you're in those really spiritual moments. But the psalms that are said every single day by the monastic community are 119, 120, and 121. Amongst treacherous strangers, I mean, you're going out, people are criticizing you, you have physical hurdles that are in your way, but you get through them because God is your protector. And then at the end, you arrive in Jerusalem. So, back in the pre-Christian days, That was the point of everyone's pilgrimage. That was the destination of everyone's pilgrimage. You'd arrive at the town of Jerusalem on the top of the mountain. But now, after the coming of Christ, the physical Jerusalem becomes the mythical Jerusalem.
So, here we look at the first Christian pilgrimage. Now, we said Exodus was, one of the most well-known stories in the Bible, right? But it's not the most known, because now we're going to the nativity scene, right? And for that's what should be the most known story in the Bible, right? So in other words, Exodus is Kobe, Matthew, or the nativity scene is Michael, right? Michael Jordan, So what happens here, right? The Holy Spirit, in Matthew's version, tells Our Lady, you're going to conceive. And at this second, this physical Jerusalem, the pilgrimage of the Jews, because remember, God for them was in a physical place. God was in the Holy of Holies. You had to go to Jerusalem to be in the presence of God. And every waking minute was remembering that. Okay? But this physical Jerusalem, at that second, when the angel said, you're conceived,
And Luke,
it has become now the eternal Jerusalem in heaven. Right? And this is where this pilgrimage we keep talking about, that is life, that's where we're going. On the Camino, we're going to Santiago. As we walk the Camino of life, we're trying, our destination is heaven, the eternal Jerusalem. Now, what do we know about this story? We see the 3 wise men or 3 kings there. What do we know about them? We know that they saw a star in the sky, right? They had a calling to this star. They saw a sign. And it caused them to have that leap of faith, to say, where am I supposed to go? For them, it was a physical sign. It was a star. For us, it can be anything. It can be meeting somebody new. It can be having, it can come to us in many different ways, right? It's that calling. And they had that leap of faith. These are 3 affluent, astute guys, maybe even kings, that just picked up and left their comforts. They got out of their comfort zone.
and what's even more interesting about that, when you look at the actual Greek text of that reading in Matthew, I think it's Matthew chapter 1, it actually, the Greek text says, the pilgrimage of the Magi.
Pilgrimage of the Magi. So we have our Christian pilgrimage. But so what do we know is that they carried with them gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Now, I know a couple things. I know that gold is very heavy. I don't know exactly how much frankincense and myrrh would weigh, but I would imagine it would be pretty heavy, right? So here they carry this, and they lay this at the foot of our Lord as he's in a manger. And we think about this on a pilgrimage. Many people walk with baggage that they're carrying, on the Camino. These things we talked about earlier, a loss, a cheating spouse, whatever it is, right?
Or even anger or jealousy.
Whatever it is. They carry it with them. And same thing in life. We carry these things with us, these burdens. We carry them with us, to lay them at the feet of our Lord, right? Now, it's really the Cruz de Ferro, okay? It's more than symbolic on the Camino, because, about 3/4 of the way through, there's a cross. It's called the Cruz de Ferro, and you've been there, right?
Yeah, anyone who's walked the Camino has been there.
Has been there. And, tradition has it that you carry a rock, and you lay it at the foot of the cross, which is to symbolize you're now unloading these burdens. Which, are they really burdens, though? Or are they gifts? Right? Is it the gift of mortification? Is it the gift of sacrifice that we carry with us? And like the 3 wise men laid gold, frankincense, and myrrh at the feet of our Lord, when we make it to the eternal Jerusalem, we lay, our sacrifice, our pain, and our burden at his feet. So we really see such great, such a great relationship with this first Catholic or Christian pilgrimage, into our own lives, and the Camino of life, right?
So Tommy, when you reached the Cruz de Ferro, when you left that stone, what were your intentions when you left that stone there at that cross?
I had some smaller rocks with me. But then I said, what do I really want to do? I want to make this very meaningful. So I grabbed 2 larger stones, flat, like those, very flat rocks, what are they called, like a piece
Shale.
of shale, right? I carried 2 of those, and on each of them I wrote something. I wrote something very long. One of them was about my grandparents, and the pain that I had from losing them. Another one was thanks for my family, and I thank you that they're still with me. And I wish I knew what I wrote on those rocks, but I can't remember. And I think maybe that's the way it was meant to be, because the thanks, the pain, was all left behind. And then you say a prayer, and you keep walking. You just keep walking.
As I mentioned before, when I started the Camino, I wanted to heal from the bad situation that I had at my job. And I brought a rock from my office building the day that I left, knowing that that's where I was going to take it. And I was like the 3rd day on the Camino, and I said, gee, that's like really small, isn't it? Like God wants more for you than that. And I said, no, it's not really about working on a career, because those things are menial. Like what I really was there for was to return to myself. So when I brought that rock to the rocks, and what I lifted off my shoulders when I dropped those were the past. To not dwell on the past, but to learn from it and to let it shape your future. The future, not to dwell in it too much, but just to let it guide you. But the present is where God is. And we should always be present in our lives. And in this present moment is where we encounter God. That was the lesson that I learned while walking.
Amen. Amen to that. So we look forward, and now the first Christian pilgrimage has taken place of the Magi. And, now we're in the, the ministry years of Christ. And, he goes to the disciples and he says, follow me, and you will be fishers of men. Follow me. He's drawing them towards them. And this is really the first pilgrimage of the disciples then, right? They're walking with Christ, who in many ways was a pilgrim himself. What do we know about the ministry of Christ is that he literally traveled all around, Galilee, around the region, preaching the good news, calling people out, bringing people in. So, even Christ himself was very much a pilgrim.
So going on a pilgrimage could also be being more Christ-like.
Being more Christ-like. Absolutely. That's what we're all called to do, right? We're all called to be more Christ-like. And which may be why we are all pilgrims. Every single one of us in this room is a pilgrim in some way, shape, or form. All of our Caminos are just a little bit different.
The Pilgrim Church.
The Pilgrim Church. On earth. Pilgrim Church on earth. We've heard that before,
Every
right?
Sunday.
Every
That
Sunday.
uses mass setting B or whatever.
Right. So now we get here where Christ says, now I've brought you towards me. Come with me, I'll make you fishers of men. Now, go out. Right? Now go forth and preach the gospel. And, really impressive, the disciples, because these guys went throughout the world. And we'll talk about a little, examples of that. But, when we see, Indian Christians, we have to recognize, they're from the time of Christ, converted by Thomas. When we see, our Coptic brothers and sisters in Egypt, they were converted by Luke, from the time of Christ. And it was all because of this moment. And had there not been a pilgrimage made by the disciples, Christianity would have never made it to these parts
It
of
wouldn't
Europe.
exist to the magnitude that it exists.
Right.
So then you have the road to Emmaus. Now, the first experience of the risen Christ after his ministry, after his resurrection. So you have the disciples, walking to the town of Emmaus, and Christ appears to them. And he says,
Oh, Elias.
well, no, that's the other one.
That's Peter. Where are you going? No.
He says, well, they didn't recognize him.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So Christ transformed them while they were along the way. St. Paul encountered the risen Christ on the road to Damascus, where he was literally blinded by the light. And until he had faith in the risen Christ was he able to see again.
Mm-hmm.
And then Peter on the road to Rome. That's where Quo Vadis. St. Peter was leaving Rome, and he encountered the risen Christ coming into Rome, and said Quo Vadis in Christ. That means, where are you going? Which is very similar to the stories, to the question that we hear on the Camino. Why are you here? Why are you here? Where are you going? Like the very, very introspective questions, right? But Christ responded back to Peter and said, I'm going to Jerusalem, or I'm going to Rome to be crucified a second time. So that gave Peter his spiritual strength to return back to Rome to face his ultimate
Martyrdom.
Martyrdom.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you have the pilgrimage of the disciples. St. Andrew. That looks a lot like Settlers of Catan, right? I'm such a geek. So St. Andrew had the monopoly on wine. So he went to have he went to evangelize the Greek communities. St. Luke had a monopoly on wheat. So he went to evangelize the Egyptians and wrote his
spices.
The spices, yeah. Wrote his gospel. India, as Tommy mentioned. Thomas, as Tommy mentioned, went to India. And St. James, the great St. James, whose feast day we celebrate today, went west to Spain and brought Christianity to Western Europe.
I'm sorry, I can't stop laughing because you called St. Thomas Tommy. And like Tommy said, Tommy went to India.
Tommy said Tommy is the man.
See,
of
this
the
guy,
hour.
that's when you know you're tight in your prayer life. You know, you call him the saints, you're like, yo, Tommy, what's
Hey,
up?
Tommy.
Hey, Jimmy, what's up, man?
Yeah. I was praying at the Cathedral St. James. Hey, Jimmy.
Hey, Jimmy, what's going on?
Thanks for bringing Christianity to Western Europe. And thanks for being here. All in one piece.
So St. James,
For my other geek friends. So this is the marriage of Christianity and paganism, because you have Christianization back in the Middle Ages of many pagan traditions. The Camino was actually one of them. This route was taken many years before it was Christianized in about 1000 to 1100 AD. And the town where St. James's remains are held is actually called Santiago de Compostela. Compostela means field of stars. And the field of stars was a metaphor for the original pagan pilgrimage that was there, because the route that they had followed the Milky Way. So when I first read that, my brain was like, you're actually like following the stars of the Milky Way to the end of the world. But then the Christianization happened after that, to turn into a pilgrimage to the remains of St. James. So I love that bit.
All these nerdy tidbits. Next time we give a talk, you really need to wear that Star Trek.
Yeah, which one? Yeah, which one?
Which one?
I'll watch whichever one you need.
Sorry,
Yeah.
live long and walk the Camino.
So, the Camino is a pilgrimage. Why is the Camino the Camino? Why is it the most famous of the pilgrimages today? I mean, in antiquity, okay, we have 3 major Christian pilgrimage sites. The Holy Land, Rome, and Santiago de Compostela. Now, back in those days, everyone would get there, by walking or on horseback. What makes the Camino so unique is this is the only remaining ancient pilgrimage site where most pilgrims reach there on foot. And you'll still actually see some people get there on horseback. Pretty cool. Watch out for what the presents they leave you on the path. So the reason this happened is because the Spaniards really tied into the idea that this is part of our culture. Our culture and Catholic heritage is intertwined. They can't be separated, right? And they have maintained a solid infrastructure of pilgrim accommodation, meaning there's always a place for you to sleep. As long as you have one of these, right? And you guys got to come and check this stuff out.
The credencial.
This is the
Come look at
credencial.
it after.
Yeah, come look at the stuff after.
Yeah.
This is your pilgrim passport. It's issued to you in a cathedral when you first start. This says he is a pilgrim. With this, you can stay in, monasteries, churches, convents,
And
private hostels.
Pilgrims are to be welcomed as Christ himself, like
Exactly.
the rule of St. Benedict.
Yep. And that's the rule that they live by. And it's because of this, right? Because there is, there's such a thing called a pilgrim menu, where it's at a great discount. It's like pennies on the dollar. You stay.
Like €8.
Yeah. Well, you get dinner, a bed, and breakfast.
And wine.
And lots of wine for like 10 to 12 euros. I mean, that's it. Right? And it's because of this is why the Camino is the Camino today. What got us to where we are today with the Camino?
So you have the whole history of the Camino. It starts with the finding of the remains, actually. So legend has that St. James actually died in Jerusalem. But somehow the remains of St. James were actually found somewhere in the east of Spain. And when they were located, they were transported to the town of Santiago de Compostela, which is at the far west of Spain, which is very close to where the end of the world is. The Camino itself, though, started with Pope Calixtus. So Pope Calixtus actually wrote the first Camino guidebook. So he would actually talk about the life of St. James in the first 4 chapters, but then the 5th chapter. That's where it gets interesting, because that was the pilgrim's guide to making a pilgrimage to the remains of St. James. And it was literally turn left at this church and, go and visit this monastery here.
Find the deformed tree, make a right.
I mean, it was that detailed.
Yeah,
And he actually had songs, and pilgrim songs and chants in there that were written in like plain song before even music notation was invented. Then you had a major resurgence in the Middle Ages during the plague, because obviously when you have hardship, you have suffering, you have the desire for healing, the desire for God's healing. And because so many people were Catholic during the Middle Ages, a lot of people left home where the plague was, which probably was a smart idea anyway, to go on the road to pray at the remains of St. James for healing for themselves or for their family members. Later on, about 1400 or 1500, we had Muslim invasion where the entire country of Spain was literally conquered. So they lived as a conquered people for hundreds of years. But during that time, you actually had the implementation of the Knights Templar. And because it was so dangerous to make a pilgrimage during those times, along the Camino, there were these knights in armor with swords that would protect you from bandits and invaders. So they retained this Camino through this period of being conquered until Spain eventually overthrew the invaders and reconquered through the Reconquista, where you had about late 1500s, and the Camino just peaked in popularity from there till about the mid-1850s.
What's really interesting there is, Santiago, we often see him, as an apostle, or he can be depicted quite often on the Camino in 2 ways. Either as a pilgrim with the shells, the staff, a pilgrim hat, or as what's called Santiago Matamoros, which means the Moor slayer. And Santiago is depicted, legend has it that the Reconquista really started with Santiago, St. James, on horseback, riding into battle and slaughtering Moors. And he is depicted on a white horse, usually, up in the air, sword drawn, and headless Moors under him. And you will see this in many, many churches along the way. So really interesting. And in a lot of ways, that was kind of like the European crusade, right? Then we go to the ebbs and flows.
So then, between them, you had lots of famous people that had walked the Camino. You had St. Francis of Assisi. He walked from his hometown of Assisi. You had Queen Isabella of Spain. I doubt she walked it on foot. She probably had people carry her along the way.
Yeah, she didn't walk. I mean, she would have been playing Pokemon Go if it was available.
You had Charlemagne.
Yeah.
But if you get to the more modern pilgrims, you have Shirley MacLaine, who wrote a book on the Camino. She walked the Camino. The reason Tommy decided to walk the Camino, Paulo Coelho, has anyone read Coelho?
Yeah.
He's
This pilgrimage.
He's a wonderful Catholic fiction writer.
His Catholicism was a little wishy-washy,
Yep.
but he also wrote The Alchemist. Great books, check them out.
Mhm.
Highly recommend them. And then The Way, which is
Which is why I
which is where
Here.
converted Chris, or brought Chris to the Camino. I mean, and this has really been the major pusher, the major mover here in the U.S., you know, to call people to the Camino. So,
Last year, 240,000 people finished the Camino. Yeah, and before the way came out, was it 2008 or 2009,
Yeah.
something like that?
Yeah.
I don't remember the exact year, but before that, it was like 100,000. So it's like, it's more than doubled since the movie came out. So it's really done great things about bringing people to pilgrimage.
So, you know, our title, this talk was Pilgrimage in the Camino de Santiago. We talked a lot about that. And then it was ancient wisdom, or spiritual wisdom along the ancient way.
Yeah.
And, you know, we didn't really want to hustle you guys, so we figured we'd throw in some spiritual wisdom here.
Yeah,
You know?
maybe we should put some of that in.
Put some of that in.
So these are some lessons that Tommy and I learned by walking the Camino that we thought we would share with you to inspire you. So first of all, you don't need nearly as much as you think in order to be happy. You know, walking 500 or 1,000 miles with just your backpack,
2 pairs of socks.
2 pairs of socks,
Washing your clothes in a sink.
you don't need nearly as much as you need in order to be happy. It can sometimes be riskier to not move. It can sometimes be riskier to not move than it is to move, especially if your current situation is a detractor of happiness or well-being,
Take this one home, guys. Think about this one a lot.
right? Like,
Something we can all do.
if your
Something.
relationships are not positive, you know, if your job, whatever, if there's anything in your life that's bringing you down, right, you have that choice.
Shake and move.
Shake and move. God is everywhere. This is even true when you're feeling the most desolate. Have faith. Moments are fleeting, and there is sometimes only one chance to have an impact on someone. Make it count. Even if you only have 15 minutes with someone, make the most of that time, because you may never get to see that person again. Any reasonable goal can be achieved by taking one step at a time in the right direction. I mean, that's universal, right? I mean, as long as you have the right goal in mind, you know, you're going closer to God, closer to goodness, closer to happiness. One step at a time, you'll make it. And last, if you keep your mind clear and your heart open, God will lead you on your path.
So, you guys may have seen the cards, right? You may have seen some of the, you know, the Facebook stuff that was put out there. You may be wondering, what is this? What is this thing? These 2 guys are just coming here talking about, you know, a trip, right? So what is this Camino Project thing? So we mentioned this briefly earlier in our talk when we did our introductions. I'm the executive director of a 501c3 organization called the Camino Project. Chris is our director of finance, okay? And we have several team members with us here now. Mache and Eric, okay? Both directors on our board as well.
Gabby?
And Gabby. Oh, I didn't see her. And this is my girlfriend, Gabby. My beautiful girlfriend, Gabby. So, what we do, we're 501c3.
She's got the keys to your car, you know.
And the keys to my heart. I could do without it. So what do? Right? We're a 501c3 charitable organization that provides all expenses paid Camino scholarships for young adult Catholics between the ages of 18 to 24. Our selection criteria, is pretty simple. We're looking for Catholics who are practicing their faith, Catholics who are serving their community, and we're looking to provide the scholarship to Catholics, to young people that couldn't otherwise afford to go, meaning they couldn't afford it and their parents couldn't afford it, right? We really want to bring the Camino experience. We believe that this is an absolutely robust, plan that we have put together. We want to bring this to people to give them a full immersion, right, in Catholic faith and culture, Catholic history. See how universal this church really is, because you see it there. We believe that this experience will, just really foster, spiritual and personal development, in a way that you really would be difficult to replicate, without going on this journey. Each individual pilgrimage is duly leveraged as a fundraising opportunity for a third-party charity. What I mean is not us, but another charity. Think of some great Catholic charities you know. When our young people walk, charities that we select will be able to leverage their media as a donor motivation and donor engagement tool to encourage more donations into their charity. So think, sponsor, 10 cents a mile, right, as these young people walk for us. So we think that this is, truly robust and a double-edged sword. Before they walk, we have a full schedule of formation programs that they'll undertake, prep classes, teach them, just really kind of strengthen them in their faith, spiritual direction, but then also some Camino prep courses. They'll also be going through a schedule of service hours, okay, that would be required to be completed, so they're offered this scholarship. There's no other organization that exists in this entire world that does what we're doing. This is completely unique. It's unique to Chicago. Not only are we benefiting the young people and investing wisely in the future of our church, but we're giving back in our communities today, right? And we believe that when these young people come back, remember, these are service-oriented young people. They're already serving. What kind of service do you think, they would dedicate their lives to upon returning? And this is the future of our church. We ignore them. We ignore the church. So we really encourage you to like us on Facebook. Here we have our 3 pillars: pilgrimage, charity, and sacrifice. You see our cyclical motto here, right? How robust this is. From donors, it goes to pilgrims, right? From the pilgrims, it goes to the real community impact, from investing in them and raising money for that third-party charity. And then, of course, anything that benefits the community benefits us all, right? And we're all right here. So, we really encourage you to like us on Facebook, right? See where we're going to be. We've got some really cool events here planned in the future, some beer tasting, stuff like that. We, of course, encourage you to consider a generous donation to us. The amount of young people that we can send in any given season is totally dependent on the money that we take in, right? Of course, I want to thank everybody here. Thank God. Thank your leadership team for inviting us. Thank God again for having us here on the feast day of St. James. I mean, how cool is that? Really? I thank our team members here. Gabby for putting together a beautiful presentation.
For hosting us.
The whole night. Thank you for hosting us, and thank you guys for being here. I would be remiss if I didn't thank my grandparents. Look at my boss crying. She's going to make me cry. Because this is really where this started. This started seeing the faith that my grandparents, instilled in me, and the service that they gave to so many people. My grandfather, and with the support of my grandmother, started a baseball league in a really rough neighborhood in Chicago, and the rule was, didn't matter how much money you didn't have, right? Every kid got a glove, every kid got cleats, every kid played ball and got off the streets, and that league exists today. So when you have an example like this, and you take a long walk, you really look in and you say, well, what am I doing? Right? And I said, I've got to do something more. It's got to be something greater. So anything I do good in my life, I of course dedicate to. So thank you.